Yes.
Nice to see you. Classes and longer hair and white. Yeah. I saw your card. It's nice that these 3 days of no rain.
Sit back there and I'll join you. Yeah, well, that's why that's exactly what I figured I would fill.
They're just emerging. Lots of great flowers. They're very rich.
I guess thank you again for having that after. Yes, it was.
Years ago.
So, yeah. I got 2 tomato plants that if I don't plant, that's
Well, I have a bank card.
Well, actually, the funny thing is, I'll hang a couple of traps up. What else?
Last 7 years, when I was a little.
Well, that's the same thing. I know asparagus and Hannah's in the college. And the back is asparagus.
Yeah, so I never lost.
I see.
Funny, but it's like,
Is it Long Island? Is it near Burn Down?
We're lucky.
I thought.
Well, so I'm teaching them in the traps. Population.
We're not burning up, we're not
Well, I either plan to I think it's the older.
Well, I went to a thing in Southern Road last week. Somebody talked to me about going. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I started asking them all about, we had good souvenirs.
But I also see miracles.
It's like a chip.
It's not a very bad game.
Sit in the front, will you, so get it started?
Sure, let's
What you are? Pull these out. None of my day.
Yeah, well, I'm sitting up here, sacrificing our poor back.
I know, right?
I know.
I forgot, this is my senior crowd,
Yeah, this is
which
not
I'm a proud
your-
member.
This is not your high school.
Yeah,
Right, hello. Hello. Yeah, say hi.
I just want to be the. Yeah. I want to see that. Okay.
We don't have a sign up sheet.
Yeah.
It's gonna be,
It's fine.
I think it's gonna be what we have right now. Intimate crowd. A cozy crowd.
You want to be in the shade. You want to get where?
Yeah, that's the other thing. There are many ways to feel this great. Okay, and look.
But I really want to know, okay, I'm looking for your history around it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, yeah, I got two. Cost me $2.40 for 4-inch pots. They were exactly because they're replacing. $1.12. Wow. I'm sure they're going into the trash. They're better than nothing.
I know, there's people there.
So watch what you say.
Oh, thanks for the reminder. So we won't talk about that incident. well on YouTube. So anybody that goes to our website is watching it right now. And I'll edit out the beginning. That would be good. I'm sure there must have been. I'm just hoping I wasn't part of it. It's kind of like an accident. Just throws out things that's
Well, then you need oregano mixed in with or sprinkled.
I'll turn it around, pull the other way.
No, I'm just going right
People will have they can take a bouquet, but not and I'll take paper
Part of our all-star.
Yeah.
Who would like a water? Anybody like a water?
Oh, good, good.
The audio's working. Who likes water?
If you would like to know, right now, it's more going through the country. If you want to look at it, it's story and talk. Okay, I'm watching. All right, good. Yeah, I just want to make sure the audio, I couldn't hear the audio. The audio. Who'd like some water? Yeah, it's like a couple of minutes. But I will edit out the beginning. I don't know.
I'm all set, well, I have it on here, I'm all set.
This is for the mulch and the hose. They actually sent me real.
That's the time we gotta do it. Okay, we're gonna get started, folks.
Give you a brief intro. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. So just a quick announcement, our next event that we're going to be doing is the MUMBET exhibit and Walk to Freedom. So that is going to be one weekend and one Saturday, so August 14th, 15th, and the 21st. And the Walk to Freedom is on the 21st. So if you would like to participate in the walk, I recommend sending me an email and I'll pass it on to the people who are organizing it so that they know who's coming. And everybody's going to be meeting at the Ashley House at about 10 o'clock. So just so you know ahead of time the time zone. So we'd like to thank Ron for coming and doing a lecture. So Ron spent his formative years working on a family onion farm in Florida, New York. From there, he went on to earn his BS, MS, and PhD in biological sciences from the State University of New York at Albany. After 5 years of developing and directing the environmental studies program at Simon's Rock College, Humphrey Barrington, he moved to the University of Massachusetts Extension Service as a specialist in landscape, nursery, and urban forestry. Now retired, he spends his time as a horticultural writer and a lecturer. That is, when he's not tending his vegetable garden. His weekly columns appear in the Berkshire Eagle during growing season and the Berkshire Edge throughout the year. He and his daughter co-authored the book Week by Week Vegetable Gardener's Handbook. Their weekly gardening tips can be found on Instagram, and follow them at Week by Week Vegetable Gardeners on Instagram. And if anybody forgets that, it's right here in the booklet, so definitely follow them. Thank you, Ron.
Hey.
You're not, I don't think you're on. Oh.
Yeah.
No, there you go, there you go.
No, there we
There you go,
Okay.
there you go, Ron.
That's one thing. Being an onion farmer, high tech escapes us. Well, thanks all for coming out. Our returning faces here. Amazing catching up on history here with Gary Penfield, who won over 50 years ago. And amazing. I watched him play soccer, and amazing athlete he was. But and then old friends that I worked with, good friends that helped me build a greenhouse recently. So thank you all for coming. And well, let's get on, because I know you're going to get hungry soon. So we'll get moving here. Well, this is called extending the season, garden season, and I'm talking about vegetable gardening, of course. I hope that's why you're here. Okay. Well, I know that's a little bit difficult to see, so maybe you're going to have to watch the replay of the video someday. But our current focus, we're all of us that have vegetable gardens now. What we're focused on primarily is harvesting. I'm out there harvesting the squash. Just started getting tomatoes now, the big ones. I've had cherry tomatoes for a while, but the big ones are starting to come in now. And, those sandwiches are going to be so good. And except that I have dirt, so I can't eat them. I cheat though. So I'm harvesting a lot of different things. Now the other thing is there are other tasks besides harvesting. Weeds, as you all know, for this monsoon that we have had for the last 3.5 weeks or so, it's been very difficult to get out into the garden because it's just been a quagmire. And the last thing you want to do is be walking in a muddy garden, because you're going to be compacting the soil. That reduces the oxygen levels in the soil. It also promotes effluent production, which can damage the plant roots. So you want to stay out of the garden when it's muddy. One of the things I have done is I put down straw between the rows, and I ran out of straw, so some parts of the garden I just couldn't get to. And now it's a battle between the weeds and the plants. So weeding is a big thing to do right now, to get caught up on. And then the other thing is pest management. And as you know, there are lots of pests now. Most times Japanese beetles, they're hitting the raspberries, they're hitting the bean plants now. So that's some of it. We've got potato beetles, we've got cucumber beetles, we've got cabbage loopers. So that's the other battle that's going on right now, is pest control. I mean, you got a lot of diseases. And one thing about all this wet weather is that certainly promotes a lot of foliar diseases and some root rot as well, because of the lack of oxygen that's in the soil. So those are the things that we are thinking about. But also, it's time to think about something else, and that is thinking ahead. And the first step in thinking ahead, that picture is spring. I know it's a little bit difficult to see, but those are tulips in bloom. But the first thing is to think ahead. But to think ahead, you got to think back. Think back to spring. And what did you do to get the garden started? What did you do back in spring? Well, a lot of things. First of all, you may have made a garden plan. Maybe not as fancy as this, because a lot of you, I'm sure, can't sketch all these beautiful pictures. I didn't do that either. But make a plan. At least have a plan in your head as to what you want to plant, when you plan to plant it, and what you're going to do beyond that. So have a garden plan. And I don't really sketch out a plan very much, or very rarely do I do that, but at least I have it in my head. I know what plants I want. I have an idea of when I want to plant them, and so that's my plan, and where I'm going to plant them. For example, as far as pest management is concerned, I do rotate crops, so I want to make sure that no crop that's in the same family goes in the same place. And having a large garden is very easy to do. People who have very spread gardens are a little bit more difficult to do, but you can also rotate within a raised garden bed. Okay, so what do you do then after you've got your plant? Well, you start plants indoors. Those that, a lot of plants that you can start very early, even before the ground thaws. So that's one of the things you do is you start planting plants indoors. And lots of times these are the first plants that you want to start, of course, are things that are cold tolerant because you're going to be putting those out first. So things like your cabbages and your rice and those kinds of crops. So you start your plants indoors first, and then, see, rely on this for my notes. Then you do your soil preparation. Once the ground thaws, once the moisture levels are low enough that you can turn over garden soil without it being clumps of mud. So then you till a garden. Now, I don't till the entire garden, the parts of the garden that I leave untilled. So I'm trying to get into a little bit of a no-till method. I'm on the conservation district as well. And one of our big concerns is no-till programs for farmers. And the reason for that is because the less you till, the more you conserve the organic matter in the soil. So parts of the garden that I leave untilled, for example, what I'll do is I'll just take the straw that I use as mulch, push it aside, and then plant. I love to do that with my corn. It seems like since I've been doing that with corn, the corn grows so much better than it did planting it where I tilled. So anyway, you want to prepare the garden soil, and part of that is tilling where you can, and then of course adding your fertilizer, adding some nutrient, because nutrients aren't static. They do move through the soil, especially nitrogen and potassium. They're water soluble, so they're going to be deleted from the soil. Phosphorus, not so much. Phosphorus depends more on the pH. So one of the things you want to do too, if you don't know the pH in your soil, you should get the pH tested every few years. Because at low pH and high pH, phosphorus gets locked up with other chemicals and it's not available. But other than that, if you have a normal pH somewhere between 6.5 and 7, phosphorus is available. And so I don't worry about phosphorus. But I do use just the same. I'll use a fertilizer that has a ratio of nitrogen to phosphorus potassium about 1 to 1. So that's like a 10-10-10 fertilizer. So whatever you get, just make sure it's got plenty of nitrogen, plenty of potassium in it, because those are the nutrients that are going to reach out. Okay. Oh, by the way, just something, this thoughts just flying in my mind here. One of the problems, there is a negative to no-till that I discovered this year. And I probably didn't observe it before, but it probably happened before, is I tend to have more cutworms where I use no-till. And one of the ways of destroying cutworms is you fall cultivate, fall till, because that brings the larvae to the surface where they freeze to death. So, but if you don't do that, then they're in the ground and they're there next spring when you do your planting. So, it's weird that for every positive thing you do, there's sometimes some negative to it. So, but I still am trying to do more no-till. Okay, so that's soil preparation. And don't forget the fertilizer. I send my wife out with a bucket to do that while I'm sitting there sipping on a fertilizer or whatever. So now your first outdoor planting, once you've got the soil prepared, are to sow seeds of cold hardy crops. And what I mean by that is these are crops that not only can tolerate cold temperatures, freezing temperatures, but they also require cold temperatures to grow best. So these are things like lettuce and mace and radicchio, spinach, arugula. So you see, it's mostly greens. And a little bit of frost doesn't harm them. But that cool temperature, those cold temperatures, they actually thrive in those temperatures. This is why it's so difficult to grow spinach in the summertime, leaf lettuce in the summertime. You just can't do that. And back in my days on the onion farm, we had a lot of other onion farmers that sometimes plant head lettuce. And the only time we had head lettuce was in the spring. And I remember when it came time to harvest head lettuce, all the neighbors had to get together. You go out there and you cut the head lettuce all in one day, because if you waited, and this was in early June, because if you waited any longer than that, as the temperatures got warmer, it would just bolt. So you can't grow head lettuce much beyond the 1st of June or early June. And also with leaf lettuce too, as you get into warmer temperatures, it tends to bolt very quickly as well. But even sometimes before it bolts, you notice that it gets a bitter flavor. So these kinds of crops, mostly leafy greens, they need that cold temperature. So those are the ones you want to get out there first. Then the next crops that you plant are the ones that can tolerate cold. They don't necessarily love the cold, but they can tolerate the cold. So those are things like root crops, cold crops, the brassica, the cabbage family, and potatoes, onions, peas. Those are things, they can take a frost, but they don't need cold in order for them to develop. So those would be the second ones that you plant. Get those ones that require the cold in first. Okay. Now, and then you can start even before our last frost date. The average last frost date for most of Berkshire County is somewhere between May 15th and May 20th. But keep in mind what average is. So if the average last frost date is May 15th, it means you still have 50% chance of frost. So it's a good idea when you put out those first crops in the spring is to put row covers or use hot caps or something like that to protect them, or at least pay attention to the weather. So when you get up at 5 a.m. in the morning, which I'm sure all of you do, because you're all gardeners, you want to check the weather. And that's the first thing I do. I check the weather. The alarm goes off at 5, put the radio on, or it's at my cell phone, I check the weather and see what it's going to be. And it looks like we had frost overnight, and I didn't cover them. I say a 4-letter word, which I won't repeat. Okay. And then in spring too, you want to start thinking about succession planting, because a lot of these spring crops, especially those cold hardy ones, they have a short growth cycle. So when they're done, you want to have another crop to grow in that spot. So for example, you could start the season early with radishes. Radishes tolerate the cold, they like the cold, and they usually will, from seed to when you harvest them, it's usually about a month. So you might plant these in April, you could put in the second plant, so that's a succession. You put in the second planting, it'll get you through the month of May, and then into June, like the first week of June, we're pretty sure there won't be a frost, although I do remember when June 1st, the frost hit me. I lost all my tomato plants that I had set out the day before Memorial Day. I didn't pay attention to the weather. And I lost them all, 70 plants. So, and to make the story even more interesting, I ran all over Berkshire County trying to find tomatoes, because everybody went out Memorial Day and bought tomatoes, so they were scarce. I did finally manage to round up 70 tomato plants, so I put them out, and no frost. But that was the year, if you remember, we had late blight disease, and 70 plants got wiped out. My wife usually cans between 40 and 50 quarts of tomatoes every year. She canned 6 that year. Not one of the tomatoes she canned came from our garden. There were 2 tomatoes that gave us. So you start off with a, is there another picture there somewhere? Oh, you start off with the radish, and then you can go to your mid-season crop. So you got your radishes done. Now you can set out your transplants or your seedlings, or even start from seeds. I do both of, say, summer squash. But your warm season crops, they come in now after that cool season crops. So then you get toward the end of the season, you've harvested your squash or whatever the warm season crop is, and then you can plant another cold season crop. Now you're back to where you began, and lo and behold, bingo. That's the secret now to extending the growing season. I should quit there, but there's more. Okay, so you have that sequence. That's one way of extending the garden season. You start with those cold hardy crops, the cold tolerant crops, the mid-season warm crops, and then you go back to what you did in the spring. So it's a cycle. Okay, so now what? Well, you want to plan ahead. Plan to extend the season to fall. So you don't want to be sitting around where you are. But you want to think ahead to fall. Yeah, I know it's, not even, yeah, I guess you could say we're midsummer, not quite. But yeah, now's the time to start thinking about fall. So what do? Reasons for a fall garden. First of all, it does extend the season. And also, a lot of vegetables taste better if you harvest them in fall. So these are things like carrots. They're things like Brussels sprouts. And the reason why they taste better is as the temperatures get colder, the plants begin to convert the starch that they've stored into sugar. And so this is what makes these plants sweeter. And so it's actually a good idea to be planting many of these crops to harvest in fall because you're going to have a sweeter product when you harvest it. Okay. And then another reason is we have fewer pest problems in the fall. Most of our pest problems occur in spring, late spring, and then early summer. We're at the peak now of a lot of our pest problems. Squash vine borers, the adults have laid their eggs, so pretty soon you're going to see your squash plants wilting. I hope not, but you're going to see them wilting, and that's because the eggs should be hatching now, and they're burrowing. This bug will burrow its way into the stem of the squash plant, and the next thing you know, they're starting to wilt. Now the cabbage moths are flying around. There are two cabbage moths. We have a cabbage moth that overwinters here, and we have a cabbage moth that flies up in the south. That's the spot when it goes south for the winter, and then it flies up here. And they came up toward the end of June, and so they're all laying their eggs now. And you're going to be seeing cabbage worms on all your broccoli, your cabbage, your cauliflower, your romanesco, and all those plants. So we're at the peak now. Potato beetles, the cucumber beetles, they're all out there now. So we're at the peak of the season. We got to start focusing on that. So there's a lot of things you're going to focus on here. Okay, so now I wish you could see this picture better. But one way, an easy way to extend the growing season for certain crops, first of all, is harvest them. But don't pull up the plants. If you cut off the main head, if you cut off the head of a cabbage plant, but leave the plant intact, it'll send up sprouts. And you'll get, if you let it go on into fall, then you'll have a whole bunch of little cabbage heads. Or what you can do is remove all but one of the cabbage heads, and then you get another large head of cabbage off of a single plant. So you'd be harvesting, I've got some cabbages just about ready to harvest, so I'll just cut those down. It'd be like almost setting out transplants of cabbage right now, which I just did earlier this morning. But I also have cabbages ready to harvest. Cut off those heads, cut off their heads, and let it be. Now you can, I think you're more familiar with that with broccoli. I'm sure you all do that with broccoli. You cut off the main head of broccoli, you need the plant, and then you get all those side shoots, which I prefer because then you don't have to chop up that main head. And you can do that with just about anything in that particular family. You can also do that, you can't see the picture there, but you can do that with your Chinese cabbage as well, your bok choy. You cut off that main head, and if you leave the lower leaves intact, they'll put out sprouts. What else do I have a picture of there? I guess that was it. But experiment with those things. It's a basic biological premise. You do this all the time anyway, but maybe not in a vegetable garden. You probably do it with your flowers. When you got the spent flowers, what do? You cut them off. Or if you got a leggy plant, you cut off the leader, and then you get all the side shoots. It's the same principle. That stem that's coming up, first of all, it's producing auxins that are inhibiting the growth of the lateral branches. You cut it off, and then the inhibition is gone, and the lateral branches develop. So the same thing is happening here. That cabbage head is a bud, and it's preventing all the side shoots from developing. You cut off the head, and then you can get those side shoots. We said if you let them go, by October, you'll have more to harvest. Okay. Now, so that's one way. You want to also continue now planting your warm season crops. As you harvest warm season crops, plant more. Beans, for example. You could be planting beans. If you harvested beans already, I don't know, I haven't harvested any beans yet, but I have space now that's available because I pulled up my pea plants, and so beans are going in there. Now the thing with warm season crops, if you want to plant second ones, what you have to do is go back to your seed packets and look at the packet where it says how many days to harvest. This, I have two seeds here. This is Masai bush haricot, which is the French bean, which I love as a snap bean because they're very straight, they're very slim, and they're very tasty. And one thing I found with these too is they have a long harvest season, so these will be long. So 58 days though from seeding, actually not from seeding, but from germination to harvest. This one is a bush green bean called Provider, and it'll produce in 50 days. So what am I going to plant if I want to plant another one? I'll go with the one that has a shorter season. So that's one of the things you want to do. Get familiar with the days to harvest for the seeds that you want to resow and see whether you have long enough growing season. So take a look at when the first frost is. Well, we don't know when the first frost is, but what's the average date of the first frost? September. Yeah, it's around September 15th for the northern end of the county and September 20th around here. But again, that's 50% removal. Yeah, a little bit earlier. Although when you think about it, the last few years, how many times have we not had a frost at all in September? Almost all the last several years. And we went well into October. And I remember wondering, didn't we go to November before we had the first frost? It was like November 1st or something like that. So with climate change, it seems like we're getting our frosts later. And but ordinarily what you do is you take the average date of frost, you back up from there, and to today's date, what's the time interval then? Is it 70 days? Okay, then let me look at the seed packets and see what the days to harvest is. Of course, then you have to add in a certain number of days for germination. This is just days from when we're up to when we harvest. So for most plants, something like bean seeds, it'll take 5 to 7 days before they appear. So this 50 days, I add 5 days to it, so 57 days from today. I hope you'll be planting later today. And so 57 days from today, I'll be harvesting them, and hopefully we won't have frost in early September. So it'll be okay. Now, let's see, what else is there? Yeah, okay, so that's, the other thing is, that's from seeding. You could also be starting transplants indoors as well, the same as you did back in early spring. You could be starting transplants of other crops as well, and then just transplant the seedlings. But remember, then keep the usually it's always advised that you calculate the days to harvest and when you set the transplants out. I never quite understood that as a physiologist. I never quite understood why they say calculate from when you set the plants out, the transplants, rather than from the day that they germinated or came up out of the roots. I'm not sure. Anyway, there's that. Now, one of the things you can cheat on a little bit with the seeds is soak them. So instead of just planting them directly in the ground, soak them. Put them in some water or damp paper towels. I find it a little bit better to just put them in a little bit of water in a jar and just wait until they sprout and then plant them. Make sure the soil is moist when you plant them. When it's dry, that sprout will die. So you can gain, because you'll have these inside, they'll be in water, and they'll sprout fairly quickly. And so you can gain some time. When you put them outside, the temperatures might not be quite right, the soil will be a little bit dry, and soil can dry, not lately, but soil can dry overnight. So this is one way to speed up the germination process and the planting process. So just soak them indoors overnight. Okay. Then also with these warm season crops, you can extend the season by using protective devices, just like you do in early spring. you do the same thing in late fall or in fall, like September. Is if there's a frost threat, put a roll cover over them. You can look at roll covers and floating roll covers or stun bonded polyethylene. They're very lightweight. That's why they call them floating roll covers. It's like tissue paper. And so they're not going to compress the plants by putting them over the top. And there's several different types. I think they give they identify them by weight. And so the heavier it is, they have more protection against frost. So you want for fall, you want to get a little bit heavier weight one. And these floating roll covers you can get at any garden center. I like to order them online, and I buy large quantities of them with a 500-foot roll, which I use forever. Okay, so protect the warm season crops. Okay, now another little gimmick that you can use to defeat Mother Nature. Makes your man in hell though. But plant some plants in containers. And I've got a huge garden. It's about 3,000 square feet. And I still plant tomato plants, pepper plants, squash plants, herbs in containers. I asked myself, why do I do this? Well, one reason I do this is because those are outside the door of the kitchen. So I can run out there instead of running down to the hill and then working my way back up the hill from the garden. So that's the lazy gardener's approach. The other reason I do that is if frost is threatened, and I want to get a few tomatoes out of it, I can just move them inside. Of course, it makes my wife and my daughter mad in hell because now the kitchen is full of container plants, the vegetable plants. But no, seriously, this is one of the things that you can do. If you want to extend the season, just for a few tomatoes, a few peppers, a few other kinds of things, put them in containers. You don't need 100 containers, you know, half a dozen. And then if frost is threatened, move them into the basement, move them in the garage somewhere where they'll be protected from frost. Usually we get a frost for maybe one morning, and usually it doesn't start at night, it's early morning, or somewhere, you know, just before sunset is when you get the coldest temperature, sunrise at night. Just when you get the coldest temperatures, and that's when you get the frost. So if you just move it inside overnight, so it's not going to be there forever, and then once the temperatures warm up, they go back out. So that's another way of cheating Mother Nature. I'll just say it makes her mad in hell, but you know, she asked for it. Okay, now the other thing you can do is plant fall crops. So what are the fall crops? Well, it may not be surprising that your fall crops, things like your Chinese cabbage here, I'm having trouble seeing this, regular cabbage, kale, chard, collard greens, all these greens. And these are the very same ones that you planted early in spring. You can now plant them, and you start doing that now, and you can plant these now for fall. And they'll take the frost because they're all cold hardy plants, and these will grow well into fall. And you can try doing a couple of techniques here. These are just pictures. Oh, root crops too, you can do that. And but the same thing is just like spring. So you're now thinking like in the spring. You're starting plants. So you're starting plants, but you also have to clear the garden, just like you did in spring. You pulled up plants, and you got debris there. Get rid of that debris. Till if you're going to till, or if you have mulch your garden heavily, just push the mulch aside, and then plant. But before you plant, you're going to have to do the same things again that you did in spring, which means you're going to have to apply some fertilizer, because the plants have used up that fertilizer, and also Mother Nature has leached out a lot of those nutrients. So before you put that fall crop in, you got to, again, you're thinking like spring, and prepare that soil properly. Okay, and that's just the same thing. Clean up the debris, turn over soil or no-till, incorporate fertilizer, and incorporate organic matter, because a lot of the organic matter too will, that you put in, it's important. A lot of organic matter constantly in your garden. Nothing grows better than this, a lot of organic matter. Again, it carries me back to the onion farm days. The fields that we grow our onions in are 90% organic matter. You may say, where do you get that much organic matter? Well, this is all reclaimed swampland. And you drain the swampland, and you have miles deep miles, but rich black organic soil. And it's between 70 and 90% nutrient. Oh, wonderful. Okay, so incorporate organic matter if you have it. So it's always good to have some compost. So what crops can you plant for fall? Well, anything that you planted in early spring, you can plant as a fall crop. So these are your brassicas or cole crops. You know, all those things that I mentioned before, your cabbage, your broccoli, and all those kinds of things. Greens. Greens are, so easy to grow, and they're so much better when you grow them in cold temperatures than in the middle of summer. Root crops. So plant carrots, plant radishes, plant beets. You know what's that cringe? Everybody in my family loves beets except for one person. That's me. That's the one thing that does not grow in my garden. I don't plant beets. Okay, leeks and green onions. You can still plant leeks. You're not going to get the thick leek. You'll get a thinner leek, but those are good. And you can't, planting onions now, you're not going to get the bulbs. What you do get is the green onions. So you pull those up, you chop them up, and so you've got those. And then peas. You say, wait, peas? You plant peas in summertime? Yeah, you can plant peas in the summertime. And what I would recommend, one variety that I recommend, and I put it up there, is Wando. And the reason why I recommend that is because they'll come up now, and most peas don't like hot weather. Wando can tolerate some hot weather, and that's the one that I plant for fall harvest. The other thing, I can wait a little bit longer until we get into like mid-August, and then look for, well, you have to plan ahead for this kind of thing, is you look for a pea that has a short season. So something like a variety that company like Fedco sells called Stripe. It's ready in like 50 days. And so if you plant it in mid-August, it likes that cooling temperature, and that's what peas like. As the temperatures are cooler, it thrives. If you plant peas now, if you plant Wando, you can take some of this hot weather. That's good. But if you want to plant some of these other peas, look for the ones that have the shortest date to harvest. So something like 50 days. Stripe is one. Tops is another one. TOPPS. So look for those. So, and there's nothing as good as a pea that's harvested in cool temperatures in the fall. Okay. Now, so you can start seeds indoors, as I mentioned before, and just be sure that when you transplant these, because we're strange and sane, I'm talking about hot, dry weather after the typhoons that we've had here. But yeah, make sure the soil is moist when you transplant this time of year, because the soils dry very quickly. And protect the plants from wind. You get a lot of wind at this time of year, and as you get more toward fall, you get a lot of rain. So one of the things that you can do, and that doesn't show up very well, but you see they set up like a screen, just as a windbreak. So you can do that as well. Now, and then for warm season crops, yes, you can extend the season by using cold protection devices, but you can also use these for some of the, not the cold hardy, but the cold tolerant crops. You can put row covers over them, and that'll protect them from the really hard freezes. Hard freeze we define as 28 degrees and lower. All these plants will probably take 32, 31, 30 degree temperatures, but once you start getting below 28, even some of these cool tolerant plants might be hurt. Cold hardy ones, no, they'll tolerate that. Okay, and another thing you can do is plant in cold frames. Who's not here? Who's your buddy? Plant in a cold frame. And this crop here, which is Ricky Bernstein, I took that picture many years ago, this is in late winter. You grow lettuce all through the winter in the cold frames. So if you have a cold frame, especially if it's a double-walled cold frame, you can grow lettuce right through the winter. And look for varieties. I can't recall them off the top of my head, but if you go to a site such as Johnny's up in Maine, they kind of list the coldest temperatures, or cold hardy temperatures for lettuce varieties that can tolerate just the most cold. So, but you can grow in cold frames. The other thing that you can do is grow in tunnels. This is what the commercial grows. They call them high tunnels. And you can make these high tunnels very easily. You see there on the left, you just take some PVC pipe, a 1/4-inch PVC pipe, put some pegs in the ground, stick the ends in them, make a hoop. And then what I do is I have just screw a thin piece of lath across the top to keep them from collapsing. And then you just put a roll cover or a sheet of plastic over the top. I was still harvesting kale all through the winter. That kale, no matter how cold it got underneath that plastic, it was still growing. And it was there in the spring. I got so sick of looking at it, I pulled it up and threw it in. And I planted more. Okay, so grow tunnels. And then you could always build a hoop house. Right, Neil? Neil's been helping me build my hoop house. And so this is going to be an experience for me. I've grown stuff in the grow tunnels and the grow frames before, but now I'm going to have a hoop house for this coming winter. And hoop houses don't have to be pricey, they don't have to be elaborate. You can get very small hoop houses. Well, you might not need anything more than about 8 feet long. And you can grow a lot of greens and root crops in a small hoop house like that. And again, it's something that you can manufacture yourself. You can again use something like PVC, you can get metal pipes, and you can get something that has many of those things that bends a pipe. And then you can attach these to a board base of 2x6s or something like that, or 4x4s. And then you just put plastic over the top. Might want a door so you can get in. You've got a hoop house, and you can do that very inexpensively. If you get really you get in trouble, just call me. So that's how you can grow all year round. First, you don't want to. You have to give up your vacation, but you can grow crops all year round, and that's how you extend the season. You can use some very simple techniques, just timing, row covers, or you can get more elaborate, but also know what the crops are that you can grow in succession, which can grow early, late spring, summer, and fall, and even winter. So that is about it. Oh, I forgot one more thing. Late season mulching. Yeah, this is the other trick. Jeez, look what I did. Pardon me. Oh, one of the things I've done with some of my crops like leeks and carrots, turnips, and root crops especially, is I piled straw over the top of it. And I've been out there, I've harvested kale, remember something else, for Christmas. I just went out in the garden and pushed the straw aside, and there it is. Brussels sprouts. Pile of straw around and go out there. Brussels sprouts are so good after they've been roasted out there. So you can pile up straw around the plants and even over the plants, and that can get you well into winter. You can like growing them in a hoop house or growing them into a cold frame. Because you can get that into January. You can get some of those crops. So that's one of the things you can do. It's very simple. Okay. And I use straw, but you can also use shredded leaves. So when you're working your leaves this year, just run the mower over and shred them up real fine. Put those in bags that you put in your bedroom somewhere, and then just spread those over the top of your crops. That will take care of that. And finally, some things need no protection. Like I said, the kale, but I do like to protect the kale. Let's see what the other thing is. Brussels sprouts. Yeah, they don't need any protection really until you get into the really hard, if you start getting down below 20 degrees, that's well. But they can take a lot of cold temperature, so you don't want to worry about that. So extend the growing season. And with that, it's too bad you can't read the
Any questions? Yeah.
That's the snowman at the grocery store, right in the middle of the produce aisle. Frosty gets caught picking his nose. Okay. All right, on that No, any questions? Oh, Neil's got, oh, he's gonna get me in trouble. He's gonna get me in trouble.
32 years without a deer in the garden, and now they're kicking the beets before I want them.
That's okay, as long as it's just beets. That's okay, as long as it's just beets.
So, is there any of the liquid deer off or any of that stuff work?
Yeah, I haven't used it. My daughter uses it in our flower gardens, and because she was getting deer eating the hostas as they were coming up. Once she started spraying with the deer away, they stopped. So.
What about Milongano?
You could use Milorganite. I don't know what it is like today, but I shied away from Milorganite many years ago, because it was coming from sewage treatment plants, and they were finding some ingredients in it that were not healthy. Yeah, and a few other things. And so I used to use Milorganite. This is about 50 years ago. And once the data started coming out, I got away from it. So I think, you could use things like garlic oil. You can make a garlic oil, mint oil, some of those kinds of things, and those might work. I haven't used any of that, but I have read that these kinds of oils, they're very fragrant, will also deter deer. So let them eat the beets, but spray the rest of the stuff with deer away. Yeah, animal. I have a fence around. Somehow rabbits. I have a double fence, to keep the rabbits out. And just this morning, I was out there. I've noticed that some of my Brussels sprouts have been chewed down, or the lower leaves have been chewed. So that darn rabbit is getting in somehow. So I think the best long-term solution is you get a dog that loves to live in the garden. That's right.
Yeah, I don't have a vegetable garden, but I have a few herbs in pots.
Yep.
And when my husband sprayed the liquid fence,
Yeah.
the flowers, I say, no, don't put anything I'm going to be eating.
Yeah.
But it is okay to spray that stuff on stuff like the herbs you're going to be eating?
That I don't know, because I would think so, because when I read the label on the products my daughter uses, they're all oils of some sort, like vegetable oils, herb oils.
Coyote urine.
Some of them have that, some of them don't. It depends on which one you get. The coyote urine and bobcat urine is a very common one, but there are others that are strictly plant oils. So you have to read the label. If they're strictly plant oils, I would think they'd be okay. But the urine products, I think you may want to stay away from those. I mean, you don't want to put those on your edible. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Well, you and I were discussing harvesting garlic.
Yeah.
And I know you've actually grown a few varieties. Harvest and then cure and then store your garlic.
Okay. Yeah, a few years ago, I had 38 varieties of garlic. And I was just showing Neil and Ricky, has been helping with my poop house. I'm down to 22 varieties now, so it's a lot easier. But they're ready to be harvested now. And so I will be harvesting next week. Some of them I'll be harvesting later today. The way that you decide when to harvest garlic, there's a couple of ways of doing that. One is when the lower third of leaves have dried up.
Now, is that total dry or just?
Total dry. Total dry, not just the ends, total dry. That's the time to dig them up. And you'll notice that if you dig them up too soon, you'll notice that the outer skin on the bulb is a little bit fleshy. If you dig them up when those lower leaves have completely dried up, they're not fleshy, they're not papery, but they're near papery. And so that's a good time to dig them up. If you pull them up and you find that the cloves have separated, you waited too long. Those you want to use right away. You don't store those because they will go bad really quickly. Because once they're exposed and lose that skin, there are a lot of things in the soil that cause diseases, rots on them. And you might even see little spots on some of those clothes. So this is why you don't want to go too long. So you gotta really plan this right. If they go too long, they separate, they don't store well, and then one people have a disease problem. So once I harvest them, the first thing I do is I pull them all up and just lay them on the ground for a couple hours and just let them dry because the roots will have mud in them, and so they'll dry. They'll dry quicker. The soil will dry if you just leave them lay on top and exposed to the sun for just a couple of hours. Then after that, I tie them in bunches of about a dozen or so, and I hang them in my shed. And so you walk into the shed, and it's just loaded with garlic. And they will stay there, live in there for up to 2 months. And if I want garlic, I just go and cut one off. And so I will wait until they're completely dried out. You'll see that the roots too will start to get a little kind of curly as they've dried as well. So that's one way of doing it. You can also spread them out. You can make a rack. Just take 2x4s, screw them together, and then staple chicken wire or hardware cloth to it, and then just spread them out on the rack with the leaves still on, because they're going to be drawing nutrients from those leaves and storing them in the bulb. So you leave the leaves on during the drying period. So I like to go, the books will tell you go 4 weeks or so. I go full 2 weeks to make sure that they dry completely. And then at that point, then I will either leave some in the basement because the garden shed will freeze, or hang some up in the basement where we have a dehumidifier, which keeps the basement dry because it's important that they have a dry environment. And the basement's cool too. It's around 60 degrees, a little bit less. So it's usually dark. It's really nice. But you don't have a lot of bright light in there during the day. So you've got low light, dry conditions, and cool. So those are ideal conditions for storing garlic. And you can get, depending on the variety too, but you will have garlic growing into spring later. I've had garlic. I actually still have some garlic from last year. And so if you dry it properly, you can keep it for a long period of time. Now, so some of the garlic, I did leave the tops on and I hung them in the basement. The other garlic is I snip off, and because I had 38 varieties in brown, and because I had so many different varieties, I save all those clementine boxes. And I have friends now that give me clementine boxes. So I separate out the varieties of garlic, and I separate it into the different types of, so I can keep track of them. And just don't drop them on the floor because 2 of them in one spot. But so that's one way of keeping track of them. Those I snip the bulbs off and I just throw them again where it's dry. So that's how I do it. That's the secret to getting your garlic and hanging on your garlic. Now, one of the things too is I plant garlic around the end of October. So that's one of the other things we're going to be planting in October is your garlic. So as I'm going to be harvesting the garlic soon, I will dry it. And then once it's fully dry, toward the end of September, I will start looking at all the bulbs, and I will select those that have the largest cloves. And those are the ones that sort out. That's my seed stock. Plant in October. So once you start planting garlic, you never have to buy it again. You just replant stock from that you grew the previous year, and you can have garlic year round in storage. Yes. It's very likely because there are fungi in the soil, viruses, bacteria, in the soil, everywhere, no matter what you do. And so this is the reason why we rotate crops, because some crops are more susceptible to certain types than others. So this is one way you get around that. The other thing that you do is with tomatoes, for example, a very common disease, which is in abundance right now, is called early blight. And what you see on the leaves is you'll see circles, and they look like targets. They're concentric circles in the spot. And the leaves are yellow. They start turning yellow. First you get the spots. You notice early blight because you see the concentric circles. And then the leaves start to turn yellow. And it starts with the lower leaves because that's the leaves that get splashed. One way to reduce this problem is when you plant your tomatoes and you're growing your tomatoes, remove all of the suckers that come up from the base. If you're growing them in cages, train them to maybe 3, maybe 4 at most main stems. Eliminate all the others. If you're growing them in a trellis, you grow them to 1 main stem. So what that means is you remove all the suckers and you remove any side shoots, more than the 1 if it's trellis, or more than the 3 or 4 if they're caged. And then the other thing that you do is remove all the lower leaves up to where you get the first set of blossoms. So that way there's no leaves below the fruit that are going to develop. And so it's less likely to get splashing on, because it will get onto the leaves first. So that reduces the chance for the leaves to become infected.
Would mulching then help also?
Mulching, of course, helps too, yes, because then you don't get the splash. It's not foolproof because I still get a little bit of that with the mulch, but as much, it reduces it a great deal. Now, you could also use, I garden organically, and so I don't use chemical sprays, but I do use fungicides, but what's called biofungicides. And the one that I use most often is, the commercial name is Serenade. But the main ingredient in Serenade is a bacteria called Bacillus subtilis, S-U-B-T-I-L-I-S, Bacillus subtilis. And that's what I spray any crop that is prone to diseases. So I will be spraying, I have been spraying my tomatoes with that. I spray my eggplant with that. Usually I don't have a problem with peppers. I also use it on all my vine crops because they are subject to powdery mildew. And so I spray that. That keeps down powdery mildew. You can also use neem oil for controlling the powdery mildew. Neem, N-E-E-M, neem oil. So there's that. So those are the things I use. This is a side note. But I find the story fascinating. And, the more you get into these kinds of things, just the history of plants, for example. Tomatoes are originated in Peru. And they were a weed. Nobody in Peru ate tomatoes. The wild tomato was about the size of a small cherry. It was dark purple color. And it was finally, I guess, maybe the Incas that moved into some of the other South American countries. For some strange reason, they took that weed with them, and they may have been apparently related species to that tomato, and they just accidentally crossbred or whatever. They started getting some tomatoes. And then it was some of the European, this is in Spanish first, that came to South America, and they saw this thing. And they took it back there where it was grown as an ornamental. And then somebody, I guess in Italy, said, whoa, look at that, looks like you can eat that thing. And that took off. And it wasn't until the late 1800s that we started growing tomatoes in this country. And now tomato is the #1 plant grown in home gardens. But the other story I wanted to tell you is about Bacillus subtilis. You know the story? Bacillus subtilis? During World War II, just before the U.S. got involved in World War II, in North Africa, the Germans were there, of course, and they were kicking the snot out of Africans. And all of a sudden, a lot of the German troops started to die. from dysentery. And in fact, there are more German troops that died from dysentery than from battle wounds. It got so bad that Germans sent over a team of scientists and biologists and microbiologists to figure out what's going on. Why are all of our troops dying, but the natives aren't dying? So they started following the natives around to see why aren't they getting dysentery? And they think that what they first found out was they did get dysentery. They were dying. Because as soon as they got dysentery, they would follow a camel or a horse. That's what they ate. Not the camel or the horse. But the person who was sick. Yeah, we're done. We have other names for it, but done. And so they began to investigate. They said, you're done. And they, of course, found all kinds of bacteria and they did experiments with it. And they found that it was this bacteria, the Pseudomonas, that cured dysentery. And from that point on, oh, by the way, and there was a lull there because some of the German troops had been done it. We had come into the war at that point, and then just drove the troops out of Africa. If they hadn't had the dysentery, they would have controlled that. So it was interesting how that came about. But how we got to use this as a fungicide was back in the 1980s. British scientists were looking for organic controls for root rot diseases and vegetable crops. Apparently they had a serious problem there, probably because of wet weather. And whatever it was, they were having a serious outbreak of root rot. And so they began to investigate this. A lot of organic farmers were. So they began to investigate what can we do to control this. So they're looking at all kinds of things. And I guess in the literature search, if you get something put across Bacillus, oh, let's give it a try. What they found was they controlled root rot diseases. And then they controlled foliar diseases. And so it became one of the primary ways of controlling these problems. Now you remember when we had the late blight, that was, it was 2009 and 2011. And it just got wiped out the tomato crop across the Northeast. And that was the year, as I said, I lost almost 70 tomato plants. And so the scientists in this country began looking at colleagues at UMass and began looking at, gee, how can we control this light blight? And we can't afford to have this year after year. It's tomato growers are going to go broke. And so they looked at the Pseudomonas. Now this is what we recommend to control early blight and late blight. So it's just fascinating, as you get more and more into what you grow and look at the history of some of the things you grow, and look at the history of some of the ways that you manage what you grow. You learn all kinds of fascinating stuff. And on that note, Mr. Other, oh, yeah.
Allium leaf miner.
Allium leaf miner.
Treated, gives you a chance to treat. How successful are you?
Okay. I just started treating that this year. Allium leaf miner is a recent problem. It was only found in 2015, first discovered in Pennsylvania in leek and onion crops. Allium, of course, is a genus for anything in the onion family. And I first noticed it about 2 years ago. Just a few, and I wasn't even sure what it was at that point. And I ignored it. I found it on my leeks, but it was just a few. And then last year, I lost my entire leaf crop to allium leaf miner. The leaf miner is a little fly. It has basically 2 generations. And the worst generation is this little tiny fly. It lays its eggs on the leaves of onions, leeks, shallots, anything in the onion family. And then the eggs hatch out into a little grub-like thing. And that burrows its way, it just creates tunnels as it goes down through the leaves into the main stem. And in leeks, it gets halfway down through, and in onions, it gets into the onion ball. It destroys it. Now, when I first, I didn't pay attention to it 2 years ago. And last year, I started seeing it, excuse me, when I was harvesting my main crop in late October of leeks. So then I store leeks in buckets and sand during the winter time. So I'm pulling these up, and oh, there's that darn little grub. So I start peeling off the layers, figuring, oh, I'll get to the center of it, and it'll be okay. Make it peeling away, and they had invaded all the way to the center. So anyway, in 2015, when it was first spotted, and each year it's spreading wider and wider. So I suspect 2 years ago it had reached Massachusetts. Now, if you go to the UMass Vegetable Program website, and you see it's listed there, the control measures are listed there. So I'm using now there's, as I said, there are 2 generations. So the generation of grubs, actually it's pupa that survives the winter, produces an adult in spring. They lay eggs, but there's not many of them. And so they don't do much. So, but they do go through the larval stage, and then the pupa stage, and then they hatch out adults in late summer, usually mid to late August. That's a large population because they get lots of eggs that were laid in the spring. So now you have a very large population of the outer roof. And so they hatch out, and they get into start burrowing down into the leeks, and that's why I lost that entire winter. So one of the things that's recommended now is harvest your leeks early. Don't wait like I've been waiting, like most people wait. It's a tasting much better than that. And so harvest them early. You know, even when they're pencil thick, like they are now, you can start harvesting them. So that's one of the things you can do. Controlling them otherwise is a little bit difficult because you have to get that first generation back in the spring. If you can kill off that first generation, then you don't get the second one. But they've already laid their eggs. So you can't spray with anything because the eggs are there. You can wait until the eggs hatch out. So you can start spraying them in mid-August, I would say, start no later than that. And I would suggest you use something like, not Serenade, but thinking of the other term, Spinosad. 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 That's another interesting story. Did that count? Quick story. I did the quick story. Spinosad. Spinosad is a fermentation product of a fungus. And it was first discovered by a microbiologist who took his family on vacation in Costa Rica. The family's there, the wife, the kids, on the beach. I guess they were making a lot of noises. He's walking down the beach, and he spots an abandoned gin mill. He said, oh, I'll go into the gin mill. There's some gin mill. So he goes into the gin mill, and he sees all the fermentation tanks. And he's looking at it. He's a microbiologist. So there's a residue in the bottom. He says, oh, let me just see what's in the residue. So he collects a sample, goes home after vacation, goes to his lab, starts looking in there, and he sees this fungus. And then he puts the fungus in the mold and grows it, and then he ferments it. I don't know how we got to the stage where we thought of trying this out on plants, on pests, mainly caterpillar pests. So anything that is in the grub stage or caterpillar stage, and lo and behold, we killed them. It's organic. And so we can use that. I can't remember, I think Monterey Garden Spray possibly is the name, but you want to read the labels. When you go to the garden center, go to the organic, and that's where you'll find Spinosad, Serenade. And if you look at the label too, look at Monterey Garden Spray, and you'll see that it probably says Spinosad, but there might be other product names too. Spinosad. The other thing that you could try would be BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, and that's a long one. You probably use that in the past. That's an old one that you use to control movement and development. It goes way back when we were gypsy moths. My mom used it when we were at university because of the purification. They have told us that now whenever we use referring to that, have to use the Latin name. I forgot the Latin name. But anyway, that caterpillar, pet caterpillars, all those caterpillars. So what we've been using for a long time to control those organic is BT. So that works well. And I use it too. I'm using that now too for cabbage worms cabbage loopers, all those kinds of caterpillars. So you can try those. So this is gonna be the first year that I'm doing this, because last year was when I really discovered how bad it could be and wiped out all my weeds. So now I'm spraying at weekly intervals with the spinosad, or I'll alternate with BT. It's a little bit early yet, but I'm doing it anyway, because I'm spraying for all the cabbage loopers and those kinds of caterpillars. So I might as well got some extra in the tank, but just go through these pieces. So I'll let you know, Neil, how that works out. Try it. You let me know how it works out for you. Yeah.
What about Parenthrin and
Rotenone and pyrethrin. Yeah, those are again natural products that derive from plants. I used to use those. I don't have any of that now because I've gone to using the Serenade mostly for fungal control. But those are ones you can use. I got away from Rotenone many years ago because there was some kind of connection. Somebody did some studies connecting Rotenone to a mental disease. Dementia, I guess it was. Medical dementia. I forgot to say it. I use Rotenone. But when I saw that research, I got away from using it. So I don't know if it's still sold, but I haven't really followed up to see if there's any further research on that or not. So let's stick with pyrethrin. You don't confuse pyrethrum with pyrethrin. Pyrethrin is manufactured. It's a similar compound, but it's manufactured. Whereas pyrethrum is the derived from plants. So,
Thank you.
okay. I think I probably kept you here well beyond your lunch hour. You're starving. Thank you for coming.
One quick announcement, if anybody would like any of the bouquets, we'll be giving them out, but don't take the jars. We have some paper towels that you can wrap them in. So.
There's a nice gift book you want to
Jen. Oh, yeah.
I remember that.
We have this. We're back on something.
Oh, very nice.
Good talk, thank you.
Yeah.
Here's the one.
Wine was last night.
Friday night, my daughter made pizza.
Yeah, I don't have quite that kind of a garden. That all.
Yeah, I'm gonna shut off.
Yeah. I thought you were going to be in there. I didn't see you there. Yeah, that was a good talk.
Yeah.
I have to pick up Sue Tarasak's name tag.
Yeah. Let me just turn off
Yes.
the live stream, and then after that, that's all that.
I'll talk.
Yeah. I'll just have to push one little button. So. All right.